Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of our faculty director, Professor Tariq Masood, I'd like to welcome you to today's event with the Middle East Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School. We are delighted to be hosting this conversation between James Snyder, MEI Senior Fellow, Executive Chair of the Jerusalem Foundation and Director Emeritus of the Israel Museum, and the internationally recognized Israeli fiction and nonfiction writer, David Grossman. Today's talk inaugurates this year's continuation of James's series aimed at interpreting the complexities of the Middle East by exploring aspects of the region from a broad range of cultural perspectives. Before I hand the program over to James, please be aware that this event is being recorded. All attendees, including journalists, are prohibited from recording or distributing content from this program in any way without prior written authorization. Time permitting, we will take questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please send it to me, Mary Fulham, using the Zoom chat function. Thanks so much. James?
Mary, thank you for that introduction. And I have to say, it's a pleasure to begin our 21-22 program, extending our ongoing series of conversations that try to look at the Middle East from the perspective of many social and sociocultural platforms. For those of you who've been with us this past year, you may recall that I have been doing this series from my study at home outside of New York City. And if you look behind me, you'll see that I'm actually in my office in New York, and it's a pleasure and privilege to be working from here and doing this from here. Last year, for those who were with us then, you'll recall that we really used a wide range of disciplines: the visual arts, the performing arts, dance, opera, architecture, design, film, television, even the narrative of monotheistic theology, always looking to expand the way that the Harvard Kennedy School looks beyond politics and public policy to get a wider perspective on what is happening in the world today. And I'm therefore delighted to begin this year using a literary perspective. And it's actually a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be hosting David Grossman, who is highly esteemed, internationally recognized as a writer, a great writer of fiction and nonfiction. He is anchored in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the Middle East, but his work reaches worldwide. He writes from a deeply personal perspective, always through a moral lens that can touch readers wherever they are. David's work, which is work that he writes for adults and children, has been published in 45 languages around the world. He is recognized in Israel and internationally. He's been awarded the Israel Prize, the Booker Mann Prize. Early on in his life and career, he was engaged personally in politics from a left-wing perspective, very much an activist, notably during the 2006 Lebanon War. But his work is not absorbed by politics. Actually, almost to the contrary, he uses the lens of literature to project a moral sensibility grounded in stories that are intensely local, but which also resonate universally. This is what is so special about him. It's what's touching about him, and this is a good part of what we will focus on today. If I can only add that our history together, his and mine, in a personal way, has a lot to do with my years at the Israel Museum, and with David's appreciation during that time, much appreciated by me for what the museum's mission had evolved to become, embracing cultural connectedness across time and around the globe. We want today to explore David's history personally and as a writer, but we want to focus principally on his most recent work, his newly published novel, More Than I Love My Life, a work which is deeply moving, which mixes fiction and nonfiction, which interweaves its story both in Israel today and also through a connection with the complexities of Central Europe after World War II and the complexities of that time. And David, just to begin, let's start with your own family history. Your early years reading Sholem Aleichem, the Yiddish writer who captured Jewish life in the Pale of Settlement at the turn of the last century. Even those who don't know him for his work know Fiddler on the Roof, which evolved from his work. So David, let's just begin with your own story.
Good evening. It's evening here, it's dark, near to Jerusalem. Shalom to all the people who are watching us now. Shalom to James Snyder. It's good to meet you again. And thank you for the warm things you have said. I was born in Israel in 1954. I'm almost 68 years old. I was born in Jerusalem. I lived most of my life there. I never lived abroad for a significant period. From a very young age, I was working in the radio as a child actor and a child correspondent. Maybe later I'll tell you the story how I got to it. I am married to Michal, a psychologist, and we have 3 children, Jonathan, Uri, whom we lost in the war against Hezbollah 15 years ago, and Ruti. I'm a writer for many years, almost 40 years. Several books, most of them fiction, some non-fiction, books for children. I like very much to write for children. Whenever I finish a book for grown-ups, I immediately start to write some books for children. It's a kind of a comfort and solace and optimism. As you said, now I published in translation More Than I Love My Life, which is a story based on a real story, one of the most extreme, really almost unbearably painful, and then takes a surprising turn. And it is the story that was given to me by the one who this story happened to her, and her name was Eva Panich Nahir. One day she called me at home. You know, James, Israel is a very democratic and straightforward country. Everybody can call everyone on the phone and to tell him or her by whom he was inspired, from whom he stole. And this lady, Eva Panich, who called me then, she had a remark about something that I did, that I wrote the other day. She felt I was not tough on the settlers as they deserve. And we started to speak, and I was captured by her unusual accent. It was a mixture of Hebrew and Hungarian and Serbo-Croatian. And I felt immediately that there is a story behind this lady. And then she said, I asked her about her biography, as you ask me now. And she started to tell me her story, her life story. Born in the little town in Croatia named Čakovec, to a well-to-do Jewish family, falling in love with a non-Jewish Serbian officer, having a daughter together, and then sent to it's not an extermination, but I don't know how to call it. It's a gulag that Tito created for people who were against, he suspected them to be against Stalin. And there the whole story started to roll, and she told me this story again and again in the 20 years of our friendship, each time adding another small detail, each time with another nuance, until she died at the age of 97. And we were good friends for the last 20 years of her life, and I regard it as a real privilege.
I really want us to focus on the narrative of More Than I Love My Life, but to amplify for those who are with us, I want to step back a bit into your history, and I want to return. You mentioned that you did start as a child actor in radio, and doing that, I think, was a kind of springboard for the political activism that was central to your life and to the forming of your personality and your moral core in those early years. And you spoke already of the tragedy of the loss of your son, Uri, 15 years ago at the time of the Lebanon War. And 2 books came out of that moment, which really were with a political focus. They weren't with the kind of focus of mixing history and fiction, which has become so central to you now. I'm referring to the End of the Land and Falling Out of Time. Can you just talk a bit about that moment and your focus then on writing that had more of a political centrality than is what you do today?
Well, I think that every book should have, among the layers that it consists of, should have a political layer. It doesn't have to be exposed, it doesn't have to be too direct, too much in our face, but the political aspects of our life, they have such influence on every walk of our life. And they force us to ask questions all the time, and they put a mirror in front of us. And even avoiding them is a declaration. And from a very young age, I was interested. I didn't know it's called politics. I thought it's called being alive, taking part in a game, trying to influence. I found myself writing again and again about the political situation in Israel, but also about the occupation of from 1967 after the Six-Day War. I was attracted to the idea of what does it mean to be occupied? How does it influence your life? How does it infiltrate to the innermost organs of your psychology, of your behavior, of your relationship, of your attitude towards the future, towards the option of having a future? These are not only political aspects in the narrow sense, they are really existential questions. And I always thought that it's so important to allow the narrative of the enemy, of the other, but of the enemy particularly, into our own narrative, that it is something that can melt the stiff points that sometimes we are trapped by. And I thought it never really damaged us as a people. It never really threatened our identity if we listen to the story of the other, of the enemy. It will only make our worldview more flexible, more in contact with real life, not with wishful thinking or nightmares or fears. And I think that by telling stories, I found a way to liberate myself even from those stiff points of the mind, of the consciousness. Because, you know, James, we all, every one of us, we have the official story that we tell new acquaintances, that we tell people we want to impress, that we want to gain their support, their love, their passion, their mercy sometimes. And over the years, we learn to tell this personal story and we perfect it to extreme, really. We make it so polished, like a crystal. We know how to handle it, we know how to play it, but we know not noticing to what extent we have become prisoners of our official story and we became paralyzed by it. Maybe we are not in this place of the story. Maybe we progressed much more from being trapped by it. Maybe we are different people now. Maybe we can, you know, change the point of view, not just being the victims of the old point of view. Maybe if we think of our childhood and we write about it, we write a book, we write a story about it, we suddenly are able to feel that maybe now we can afford our parents more liberty. Maybe we can be more generous with the way they looked at us. Maybe they had their reasons. Maybe also mama had a mama. And also Papa has the right for psychology. Not only us have the right to psychology, but also our parents. And once we do it, suddenly something is being released in us and then become more free and more of a flow and of freedom. And we are not totally trapped by it. And I'm talking to you about individuals, human beings, but also it applies to countries, to nations, because every nation must have probably in the beginning of its creation a kind of a huge myth, a mythological myth. And usually there are stories about wars and how we overcame our ferocious, cruel enemies, and we build statues for them and sculptures, and we portray them and we write glorifying songs and poems for them. But maybe after some years or decades, it's about time to loosen up a little this official story of the state and to look at ourselves from a somewhat different point of view as a nation. And as I've said, to allow the narrative of our enemy to infiltrate into our inner narrative. And then suddenly, well, we see maybe there are some points we can communicate with. Sorry.
You know, David, you're getting right to the heart of what I admire so much about your writing, because as you know me, you know that I have a mantra, which is that culture and cultural expression can transcend politics.
Yeah.
At the same time, what you're describing right now is that if you tell stories from the place where you are, the politics of that place are of necessity part of who you are and part of what you are writing about. And, you know, I don't want you to reveal the details of More Than I Love My Life, because everyone has to read it and be so taken with it as I was when I read it. But I want to explore that more. And I want to start by talking about, you write in Hebrew, and yet you always collaborate with translators who are authors, actually, authors and translators who can take the work that you write in a language with so much meaning for you, which has meaning where you are in Israel, but then communicates to the rest of the world. You write in Hebrew. Talk about that.
Yes, I write in Hebrew. It's the only language I can use in order to write nuanced situations. And here in this book, it was quite a challenge because there are three main characters, three very strong women who share, if one can say so, share the same wound, the same secret that goes in the family for 3 generations. And the oldest of them is Vera. This is based on Eva Panich-Nahir. And she's 90 years old when the story takes place. And she has a very special language that I described before, this strange accent of mixture of Serbo-Croatian, Hungarian, Hebrew. And I wanted to recreate this special accent because when we were young, my generation, when we were the young ones, children, we were very embarrassed and ashamed by the language of our parents who came from over there, from the Shoah or from the diaspora. And they didn't know to speak well, and they had a strange and funny rhythm or music when they spoke. And many words they missed. It was Ephraim Kishon, the great Jewish humorist, who said Israel is the only country where the mother learns the mother tongue from her children. And it is true. But we were so ashamed that our friends will hear the language and the accent of our papa and our mama. And we tried to buffer between them. And now when I wrote this book, I felt they should be legitimized again. This broken language came from broken people. And I wish that something of the injustice that we have inflicted on them would be recovered. And even the title of the book in Hebrew is different. It is, with me, life plays a lot. Iti hachaim meshachek harbe, really broken and irrational sentence, but makes sense to everyone who grew up in Israel. And part of the reactions that I got to the book in Israel was people who really felt relieved that this language was legitimized again. So I write in Hebrew. Hebrew is a very rich language, not in vocabulary, by the way, but in the layers of the conversation. Sometimes I like to think that if Abraham, the patriarch, Avraham Avinu, was to sit with us to the dinner table, he probably would be able to understand at least half of the conversation of my 9 or 6 years old granddaughters. And it's a wonderful thing to think about, that there is such a sequence of time, of identity, of knowledge, of experience, and all is embedded in the language. And the language is like what is left on the bed of the river after the water has gone, the residues of all the events, of all the history, of all the tragedies, of all the achievements. And I love to write in this language because you can mix together so many layers. You know, you take a language of a taxi driver and he quotes the Bible without even knowing it, because he got it from the prayer. And the language of the slang in Hebrew is so rich and vibrant because of the fact that many came to Israel from different countries and they cannot always speak the formal literary language, so they speak slang between them. And it's so beautiful to see a newcomer from Ethiopia and a newcomer from Russia talking together with each other, and they create a whole new dictionary, you know, that I have to make an effort in order to use it in my books. But I learn all the time, I learn. And there is really this feeling that when I write Hebrew, there is such a voice chamber, a huge voice chamber that echoes so much, even if I did not intend to echo, it does. And you know the story, of course, maybe it's also a myth, but I think it's based on truth about the person who came to Israel in the beginning of the 20th century. His name was Eliezer ben Yehuda, and he decided that he will revitalize the Hebrew language, because the Hebrew language, as you all know, I'm sure, was like the dormant beauty for 1800 years. Nobody was speaking Hebrew. It was used only for sacred ceremonies and rites and for reading in the Holy Scriptures and for holidays, but it was not the language of everyday life. And this person, Eliezer ben Yehuda, he created a paper in Hebrew. Can you imagine a paper? And he had to take words and to invent words, because there were so many words that were missing. Then in the Bible, you don't have a tomato, for example. So he translated it to a flirtatious lady, actually. That's the meaning of agvania, ogvania. And he invented hundreds of words. And he wrote a dictionary for Hebrew. And then the most touching story about him, I think, he married a woman. In their marital agreement, he forced her to write that if she bears a child, he will have, the child will speak only Hebrew. And they had a child, his name was Itamar, a beautiful Hebrew name today. And they spoke only Hebrew to him, and he spoke only Hebrew. Can you imagine, James, the loneliness of this child, the only Hebrew-speaking child on earth? What a strange thing. And he later became a wonderful journalist, and he wrote only in Hebrew. And again, I look at my two granddaughters, and they are playing together in Hebrew, and they quarrel in Hebrew and love in Hebrew and everything in Hebrew. And for them, it's taken for granted. They don't even think that it is such a genius invention that was not alive until 100 years ago.
And you know, really, David, so many of the things that you are saying now are where I want this conversation to go. And I want to come back to the point about this notion of generational embarrassment, you know, the eccentricity of those who are your parents, your grandparents, and how you contend with it. And you describe it so beautifully in Israel, but that story could be told by the children of immigrants in countries all over the world. And the things that are eccentric and peculiar for each of them in their home countries and in their native tongues are relevant and parallel for others elsewhere in the world. And in a funny way, this is why you can take things as topical as politics and infuse them into stories that really are fictional narratives, but which have meaning for you because of who you are and where you write them, but also have meaning elsewhere. And, you know, just listening to you now, you and I have talked before about the challenge of being the writer, being the storyteller, or being the character in the story. Because the character in the story is telling a story that you want that character and those characters to tell. And yet you often have a storyteller narrating their story. And of course, you're writing. And just listening to you now, where you speak of this and you speak of how important it is to anchor this experience for you in Israel as the homeland, yet it becomes relevant all over the world. And you think this is what makes literature, fiction and nonfiction, such a powerful medium for delivering that kind of message wherever you are?
Well, I listened to you. First, you asked, I think, 4 or 5 different questions. So it's all in one ticket. I'll try to focus on 1 or 2. I think what I do, what writers do usually, is to take a narrative and to investigate it and to explore it. And I hate the word narrative. I think narrative is a human story that has congealed, that has frozen. And what we do, writers, is to take a narrative. It can be the narrative of a family. It can be the narrative of a husband and wife who are quarreling about something. It can be the narrative of the children, the narrative of friendship, and of course, a narrative of a nation. And we take this narrative and we break it to pieces, really to pieces, and then we try to recreate it again in a more humane way. Today, the story of the world today is being told by the mass media. This is the greatest provider of stories to all of us, and we are all consumers of the stories, the endless and the huge amount of stories that is being poured on us every day, every second, and brainwash us. And I think that this should be balanced, this power of the mass media on our life. Even the term mass media is very tricky one, because it was coined by sociologists in the 30s of the previous century. But it is tricky because we say mass media and we think it is the media that is tuned to the masses. But actually it's a media that makes human beings into masses, and sometimes into a mob, by its sentimentality and kitsch and self-righteousness and all those bad qualities. And these are the stories that we are being fed by. And in such a world that is totally portrayed by such a way of storytelling, the place of literature is so important, because literature allows us to stay on things, to be with capital B, not to rush. It allows us to look at things in a more complicated, inner contradictory way. It breaks stereotypes. That's maybe the biggest thing that literature can do. There is in the Talmud, in the Gemara, there is a beautiful sentence in the chapter of Zvachim, Masechet Zvachim, and it says there is no joy like the untie of a doubt. And it means that if you have a doubt and you are anguished by it, and suddenly you untie it, and then you breathe, you are free again. But I think that there is another greater, if not the greatest joy, and this is the joy of untying a stereotype. That you had a stereotype of some person or a group of people or a nation, and it was a very fixed stereotype, very rigid and very cast in cement. And suddenly you write about it. And when you write, you have to enter, to penetrate the skin of the person or of the group you write about. And you allow, or you need to prevail totally in all their inner spaces and to become them and to be them, not to impose your inner constitution on them, but to allow their inner constitution to surface. And then if you do it, suddenly, even the most stereotypical person that you trapped in your world, you starts to move more freely, starts to become a human being, not because you look at him, but because he is or she is. But only now we allow them to be between ourselves, and even the place in us that was rigid, because there we kept them trapped, the other ones. Even this place becomes free and flowing, and we gained not only the other person, we gained also ourselves. Our being becomes suddenly more multi-layered, more complicated.
David, you say that every time I ask a question, I'm asking 4 or 5 questions. Every time you answer, you're surfacing 4 or 5 extraordinary topics that I want to cover in our short time together with you. And you know, when you speak about mass media and the effect that it has on us and how it's a kind of sociological phenomenon, this is exactly why I talk about literature as a cultural medium that transcends politics. And I want to come to a kind of core example from More Than I Love My Life. And it's something you and I have discussed. And again, we don't want to spoil the story, but everyone understands that that story takes place in Israel. It takes place in the landscape that was Yugoslavia after World War II. It's about that time, it's about today. And it mixes personalities, it mixes a kind of family heritage in Eastern Europe that then comes to Israel, that then goes back to Eastern Europe to confront itself. And really, you and I have talked about, and in the story, you understand that what is central there, a theme that is central, is the meaning of the notion of home. For you personally, and for the Jewish people, and for all people everywhere, there's this notion of living your life where you live it. It's a place that can be secure, or it's a place that can be fragile and complex. And peace in your life comes from the sense of security that you are able to find at home. I know this is a big subject for you generally, but it's a sort of lightning rod for the core of the story in More Than I Love My Life. And I think it's actually a great example of how your use of literature really allows culture to elevate above politics, to transcend politics.
Well, let's start with the almost fact that Jews as individuals and as a collective never felt at home in the world. It's a group of people who never felt at home in the world, let alone some rare periods or some rare places that hosted them. But even in the most hospitable places, somehow the earth was shaken under our feet all the time. All the time there was a preparation for another act of violence or deportation or genocide, the Shoah, of course. And the state of Israel, for me, was created so that at last we shall have a home. There will be a home for the Jewish people. And a home means a place that you own it, it's yours, there are no doubts about your ownership of it. You have settled all the questions with your neighbors. You know where they end, where you start. You have a feeling of having a future there, of seeing a sequence of children and grandchildren there. It's a place where you feel convenient and fearless and comfortable, a kind of comfortability of being, not to be all the time like an entrenched fist, you know, but to be loose, to be curious at others because you are loose, because you are not in tension all the time. You can afford yourself to be curious, to be empathetic to others, to those who were your enemies even. It's a state of mind more than only a political state. And for me, the fact that we have Israel is really a miracle. I'm a non-believer and this is a religious term, but in that sense, when I speak about Israel, I think it's a miracle. The fact that 3 years after the end of the Second World War and the Shoah, we had our country. Now I have a lot of criticism and reservation from the behavior of Israel in many fields, in the political and the military, but I never for a minute forget that this was our life insurance, the fact that we had Israel, that we are able to protect it and to defend it. And I just wish that being at home will mean that not the army protects us, but something more inwardly, because the army cannot really solve all the complexity of our being here in the Middle East that rarely wants us. But I don't want Israel to be a fortress. I want it to be a home. And I'm very glad that the last accords that have been achieved, the Abraham Accords, which created peace or the beginning of peace or the beginning of a dialogue between Israel and Dubai and Bahrain and Morocco and some other countries, because it will help to break the stereotype of both peoples. But this achievement cannot compensate or cannot answer the question, the major question of the conflict in the Middle East, and this is the situation of the Palestinians. We can have, of course, this piece of the reach between us and Dubai and Bahrain, but we need to do the piece of everydayness, the piece of justice of human size between us and the Palestinians. Only if they will have their home, we shall have our home. Only if we shall have our home deeply, thoroughly, they will have their home. And I'm not talking about a Hollywoodian home, you know, that we and the Palestinians walking hand by hand to the sunset. Not at all. It will be a very fragile home. There will be many people who will become outraged because of the compromises that both sides had to do. And there are many and enough fanatics who will try to assassinate this baby peace. But if we shall be really courageous and really clever, I mean Israelis and Palestinians, we shall be able to create a situation of a home for us and a home for them. There will be a border between the two entities because after more than 100 years of conflict, they are unable to live together. They have to be educated in order to live together. They don't have this political maturity that countries like Canada or Belgium have. But maybe after some decades, things will change, the definitions will become loosened, more flexible, and new option of arrangements would be possible.
You know, much of what you say just now speaks to a couple of very important points about, I think, the mission that you embraced in your writing. One is to have the courage through literature to write about subjects that are so complex. And the other is to realize that the first step in understanding the politics of place is to accept and embrace the frailty and the complexity of places where you are. And, you know, to write this book where the notion of home, identifying and coming to terms with what is your home and understanding that peace comes to you when you feel secure in your home. I mean, clearly where you are, this is a sensitive subject. It is sensitive for you personally, for the Jewish people of the state of Israel. It's sensitive for all the other people who call that their home. And this is a story that you find elsewhere in the world as well. For me, this is a very deep and meaningful example about how something as specific as what you have written in More Than I Love My Life, which is so anchored for you at home in Israel, can have relevance to others in the rest of the world. I guess a question for me, and I'm sure that you hear from a lot of people all over the world as your books go out worldwide, do stories like the ones that you write, and particularly stories like More Than I Love My Life, do you feel that they can help people elsewhere in the world who don't have a familiarity with the complexity of Israel as it is today? Do you think that a story like this can help them understand and appreciate what is the reality of Israel, what is confounding about the reality of Israel, and what is its potential for resolution?
If it helps them to understand Israel more, okay, but it's not my purpose, I must say. I have one purpose: to tell a good story. This is what writers should aspire for, to tell a good story. But of course, as I said, there is a political reality layer to every book that I've written. If something can be learned from it, is the need to insist on nuances, not to be tempted by generalizations, stereotypes, prejudices, but really to insist on nuances. And I can tell you that the ability, and I feel it, it's rare, but I feel it from time to time when I write a good paragraph, you know, the feeling of doing something precise in a thick world, a world that has a very thick way of looking at things, of categorizing things, of catalogizing people. And when we write, when writers write, we have this privilege, you know, to be precise, to be delicate, to be nuanced. And it's such a pleasure to do it, such a feeling of purity, even of doing the right thing. Okay, go ahead, ask.
No. It's just your point about nuance is exactly to the point. And the first time years ago that you and I spoke about all of this, and you said to me, it's not about confronting the brick wall of politics. It's about understanding frailty and complexity, and it really is the first step. And you know, reading More Than I Love My Life, and again, it's not to spoil this for those who have not yet read it, it's the notion of betrayal. What does betrayal mean? And your treatment of that question throughout the book, so that it's really about betrayal and being betrayed. And it's about the different understandings of every person whose perspective on that is, of course, his or her own. And this notion of subtlety, of nuance, and of shedding stereotypes and prejudices is really what unlocks the door to being able to understand a path toward a different time and place. And it's something that's quite remarkable. That's not so much a question as it is just a comment. And I want you to continue with what you were saying before.
Yes, I spoke about, okay, there is a moment in the story in More Than I Love My Life. And I'm impressed by our ability not to make any spoiler, but even hardly to talk about the book. But there is a moment where Gili is the third protagonist. She's 39 years old, the daughter of Nina, the granddaughter of Granny Vera. Gili was abandoned by her mother, by Nina, when she was 3.5 years. And she really hates her mother. I mean, sheer hatred without any sublimation or going around, you know, she's straightforwardly hating her. And then there is a moment in the story where she feels the weakness and the fragile being of her mother. And she said, for a moment, I didn't hate her. And then she said, I was so afraid, as if I lost my talents. Who am I without the hatred to Nina? And I thought, how many of us are building our personality against such a terrible or traumatic experience until we no longer know who are we without this trauma, these huge dark parts of ourselves, our hatred, our suspicion, our contempt, our all the bad things. Who are we without the hatred? Who are we without the war, for example? Who are we without the war? It's a question I don't have an answer to, and I will let it echo in the air. Who are Israelis and Palestinians without violence, without hatred? Who are we? Do we really know ourselves? Because what we see might look like a real reality, but it's also probably a denial of a great part of our reality. So who are we?
You know, it's interesting because where you are a magician actually is in interweaving the kind of particularity that you're talking about now and the universality of what you are trying to articulate and what you are trying to enlighten for your readers. And I think this sort of unlocks the door to an understanding of why stories that are so specific can have meaning far more broadly. And you know, we want to take a few questions, but before we do that, and I'm not comparing your writing to Shtisel, the television series that has been embraced all over the world. But there's a parallel in these examples. You know, I'm sure we've all seen Shtisel. And what is Shtisel? Shtisel is about Haredi Jewish life in the Geula neighborhood in Jerusalem. It couldn't be more specific. It couldn't be more alien to a lot of people all around the world. And yet it's been on HBO. It's been written about in major media all over the world. It has been embraced everywhere. And the question is, or perhaps the answer is, that the more detailed you become with the story as eccentric and specific as that, perhaps the more you are making it possible for people to shed stereotypes, for people to shed what they are given to understand through mass media, and to begin to understand and unravel the complexity of their own lives and the complexities of where they live, because they are seeing the complexity of those particular narratives, which is the case for you.
Yeah, I think you answered. I have very little to add. I'm fascinated by Shtisel. And I'm fascinated because of the verbal layer, because they speak this mixture of Hebrew and Yiddish, and they Yiddishize the Hebrew and Hebrewize the Yiddish. And it's really fascinating. And the stories, all the stories, on the one hand, it's just a melodrama, but it's so well done and so deeply done. And we got this crack in the curtain to look and to peep into other reality. Maybe even, you know, for some of us, it's almost an alternative reality. You know, had my grandfather, who was an Orthodox Jew, if he was still alive, and he would look at me and say, you should have been a yeshiva bucher, you know, you should be a student of yeshiva. And I could see myself in another life being a yeshiva bucher. So there is also this kind of a sentiment of identification. Yeah, go on.
No. You know, this won't be a spoiler because everyone has seen Shtisel and it's over. But in the very tail end of Shtisel, the finale is when the two brothers fight, and then one says, Shulem says to Nuchem, let's sit and drink seltzer. And they go to the dining room table, and Shulem says, when you sit at the table, all the generations are with you. And of course, every character that's been either in the series or referenced in the series suddenly sits at the table, and it's overwhelming, and you cry. I cried, but I cry easily, I guess. But you know, it's this notion that you're bringing together a reality and a magic, and you're getting a message from it. You do the same, and that is what happened there. And it's funny, I'm just thinking about it. This is how Sholem Aleichem connects to Isaac Bashevis Singer, connects to Shtisel, connects to you. This is this whole process of bringing fact and fiction, reality and unreality, and using a story to give a message that can be as broad as that.
Yeah, and you spoke before about the betrayal, and I will just add that, you know, sometimes I start to write a book and I have no idea where it's going to lead me and what is the topic of it, if there is one topic, or how to summarize it. And I continue to write, and I have suddenly the feeling as if the story is catching me here, you know, like an eagle kidnapping a lamb. And it takes me beyond my borders and my limitations. And at first I'm really afraid, you know, there is a feeling of fear, because I feel that the story exposes me or gives me away or betray me, takes me to places that are against my small petit bourgeois interests, you know, of what my wife will think of it, what my children, what my father will think of it, what my prime minister will think of it. But after a while, I stopped thinking of these people, and I'm totally magneted to the magnetic field of the story itself. And then I realized that the story has not been betraying me, but rather it was more loyal to me than I was loyal to me, when I dared, more than what I dared to be loyal to myself.
And you know, what you just described now is what is so moving for me. in all of these examples, particularly yours, where this kind of mixing of a reality and a fiction to deliver a message, it creates these moments of serendipity. It's like creating an epiphany that allows you to use that little moment of storytelling to create enlightenment. And it's magic. You know, I feel we need to be mindful of time, and I know we want to take a few questions. So Mary, if I might ask you to just read the first, let's do 2 or 3 questions so that we're, again, being mindful of the time of all of those who are with us.
So the first question is, you have mentioned the loss of your son and how it has affected you. Do you think the loss of a loved one makes us think more about the other or the enemy, as they too lose loved ones in wars, conflicts, and make them more human? And I will read the second question so you can consider them both. All right. In December, the White House will host a summit of democracies to defend against the rise of authoritarianism. It seems transcending politics by whatever means will be front and center. Could you comment on how you see your role as a cultural witness of such an empathetic message in the context of strengthening our global democratic foundations?
Well, I'll start with the second one. I think by writing, by reminding what we are made of, we humans, by reminding our diversity, the uniqueness of every one of us. This is already a political and democratic act. By being sensitive to the language that we use, by not allowing others to manipulate us with ideas or false words, by exposing ourselves to the misery, to the sometimes tragic life of another person, another group of people. This is already a very, I find, essential act of democracy, of equality, of enlightenment. That's what I can say about that without going to harsh politics. And about the first question, which is not easy to answer, I think loss makes you, not always, of course, and I don't want to generalize, but loss makes you more aware of the suffering of other people. You are more exposed, you are less protected. You remember what does it mean to lose someone precious. Of course, there will be people who will take different conclusions from that. There will be people who will turn towards hatred and violence, and they will think that their personal catastrophe justifies everything they do. I'm on the other edge. I think that loss can teach us so many things. Loss can make us understand that how fragile we are, how fragile, how lonely sometimes we are. It can develop us. Yeah, I prefer not to talk more about it. I mean, I wrote a whole book about life after a loss, falling out of time. It's called, and it's a book about a family who loses her son, and they are walking somewhere, they don't know where, because they want to meet with him. And the whole journey is a journey of longing for him and fear from what will happen to their grief if they stop grieving him, if they will lose the longings for him. And it's written in the form of a poem, of long poems. And it's poems because maybe poems or poetry is the closest to silence. And while I was writing this book, all the time, on the one hand, I felt I must write it because I must give words to something that nobody else would give me his or her words, and it will be suitable. I need to create my own language in order to talk about this catastrophe. And on the other hand, I thought, how dare I write about this? How dare I put this huge thing into the small, petty words of human beings, words that tend to be cliche. And I think my patience for cliches have reduced dramatically. I cannot really think or listen to someone who speaks in cliches. I feel that maybe being a writer is someone who feels claustrophobic in words of other people. And when you write about loss, it's even more conspicuous.
You know, David, I want to thank you for those words just now. And I want to say to all of those who are here with us, you need to understand David is a very private person in every respect and on every level. And it's almost impossible to reach him. He only uses a landline telephone. You can't reach him on email. You can't reach him on a cell phone. It's rare to have a Zoom moment that we're having with him now. And whenever I ask him about this, he says, my life is devoted to writing. If I do all of those other things, they will only be a distraction from my mission. So before we close, I have one last question, which is indeed that you are a writer. You are always writing. You never stop writing. And now that More Than I Loved My Life is behind you, what's next? What are you writing now?
Well, first, as I said, after I write books for grown-ups, I need to write something for children, just to encourage myself and to be more optimistic. And I like to write for children. I wrote almost 20 books for children at a very young age, 3, 4, 5. And I always think of this magic hour in the day where all the arguments between the community of the grown-ups and the community of the child ended or subsided. And then there is the intimate moment when the parent reads a story to a child. And the story is magic because the vocabulary is somewhat different and there is humor that maybe does not prevail in this house of the child, and some surreal ideas and things, and a lot of warmth to ease the trip of the child towards the night, because the night is dreams and nightmares, and the child is alone in his or her bed and he keeps hearing his parents and the other sibling continue to do their things, and he gets a glimpse of a feeling, how was the world without him? And therefore I aim my stories for children, especially for this specific place. And the next book for children that will come out in some weeks here in Israel is called Lekol Kemet Yesh Sipur. Every wrinkle has a story, and it's about a child and his grandpa. And the child discovers for the first time the wrinkles of the grandfather. And he starts to ask how they became, how did he get them? And is it painful when they come out? And will he have wrinkles when he grows up? And these wrinkles remind him of happy things, and the other wrinkle reminds him of sad things. So it's about this strange conversation, very soft and warm conversation. But after this is done, probably I'll go back to writing a novel, because nothing, James, listen, if something come up out of this meeting, remember it, nothing is more pleasurable than writing a novel. A novel is a whole world with its own constitution and its own inner grammar, and its own everything. It's so wonderful to create, to make something out of nothing, of total nothing.
You know, here's food for thought. You were just talking about the children's books that you do, as if writing for children and writing for adults are two different experiences. Every child becomes an adult, and every adult reader of yours was once a child. So right. This is the same kind of intermingling, in this case across time. It's not around the globe. So that's food for thought for you. And really, I'm thinking, as we've been talking now for the past hour, the first time we ever spoke about how confounding politics can be, you said, but if you think that it's not politics, it's about understanding frailty and complexity. And politics is one dimension of that. And when we first talked about it, we were talking about Israel, because Israel is exactly that. It's fragile and it's complex. But of course, today we're living in a world where the entire world is fragile and complex. And I think perhaps that gives greater meaning to the writing that you are doing, and it gives greater meaning to getting messages like the message of More Than I Love My Life out into the rest of the world. And I guess I just want to close by thanking you both for what you do and for what your writing gives us, but also for your sensitivity and understanding the importance of what you do for people who read your work. Really, it's quite something. And I thank you for doing the conversation just now, but also I thank you for what you do for all those who read your work.
Thank you very much, James. It was lovely to see you and to have this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
And
Thank you all.
next time in Jerusalem in a few weeks' time, and it'll be a pleasure.
Okay, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, next year in Jerusalem.
And with thanks to all of you for being with us. And we look forward to being with you again next month to continue our series together. Thank you.
Goodbye to all. Ciao, ciao. Bye. Good night.